You know that feeling when you've dedicated your entire life to something, only to discover it was all built on lies? My name is Avery Mitchell, and for 15 years, I thought I was building a future with the love of my life and his family's century-old business until I found those messages. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. 3 weeks ago, I was preparing for our anniversary celebration. Today, I'm signing the papers to sell Parker Industries to their biggest competitor. What's even better? Parker doesn't know. Not yet. Tonight, I'll be sitting across from him and his new girlfriend at what was supposed to be our anniversary dinner. I've spent years helping him build his father's legacy, sacrificing my own dreams, my own company, to stand by his side. But now it's my turn to take back what's mine, with interest. Some might call it revenge. I call it justice. The Mitchell and Parker families had been intertwined for generations in Oakridge, Connecticut. My grandfather and Parker's grandfather had served together in World War II, and our families had summer barbecues together since before either of us was born. Growing up, I barely noticed Brandon Parker. He was 4 years older, and when you're 8, a 12-year-old might as well be from another planet. But things changed the summer I turned 19. I had just finished my freshman year at MIT, studying business management, with a focus on technological innovation. Brandon was 23 and had recently graduated from Wharton with his MBA. He had returned to Oakridge to begin taking over the family business, Parker Industries, a manufacturing company specializing in precision medical equipment that his great-grandfather had founded in 1923. That summer, Brandon's father, Richard Parker, suffered a massive heart attack. The community rallied around the Parker family, including mine. I spent most of my summer helping out at their home, cooking, meals, running errands, and just being there for moral support. As Richard slowly recovered, Brandon and I grew closer. One night, as we sat on the porch of the Parker estate overlooking the Connecticut River, Brandon confessed his fears about taking over the company. "Dad's always been the visionary," he said, his voice barely audible over the symphony of cicadas. "I'm good with numbers, with strategies, but I don't have that spark, that ability to see what's coming next." I remember how the moonlight fell across his face, highlighting the worry lines that had formed over the past few months. "Maybe you don't have to," I suggested. "Maybe you just need to surround yourself with people who do." He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "People like you?" That was 15 years ago. 15 years of building a life together. 14 years of working side by side to transform Parker Industries from a regional manufacturer to a national leader in medical technology. 12 years of living together. 10 years of being engaged. And 3 weeks of knowing it was all a lie. I found the messages by accident. Brandon had left his laptop open when he rushed out for an early meeting. I needed to email myself some files we'd been working on for an upcoming presentation. That's when the notification popped up. "Good morning, handsome. Miss you already. Last night was amazing." Kayla. I wish I could say I respected his privacy. I closed the laptop and confronted him later, but something in me, something that had perhaps been suspecting the truth for months, made me click. Hundreds of messages, going back 7 months, pictures, plans, conversations about their future together. And worse, conversations about me. "When are you going to tell her?" "Kayla, it's complicated. The company's in a delicate position. Once the McAllister merger goes through, I promise." "Brandon, I'm tired of being your secret. You said you were just staying with her for the business. The merger was approved 3 months ago." "Kayla, you know Avery. She's brilliant, but emotional. If I don't handle this right, she could cause problems for the company. Just a little more time." Brandon, brilliant but emotional. That's how he saw me. A potential problem to be managed. Not the woman who had postponed her own dreams to help build his. not the partner who had developed the very innovations that made the McAllister merger possible. I closed the laptop and went for a drive. I ended up at Crystal Lake, where Brandon had proposed 10 years ago. 10 years of being engaged with always. The same excuse for not setting a date. After this next milestone for the company. There was always a next milestone. As I sat there watching the sunlight dance across the water, I realized something. I wasn't sad. I was angry. No, I was furious. Not just at the betrayal, but at myself, for believing in us, for putting my dreams on hold. Before meeting Brandon, I had plans to start my own tech company. I had innovations, ideas that could have changed the medical technology landscape. Instead, I poured those innovations into Parker Industries. My patents, filed under the company name because we're going to be family anyway. I drove back to his house with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Brandon didn't come home that night. A text at 11 p.m. Working late. Don't wait up. I didn't respond. Instead, I stayed up all night, reviewing his company's finances. Every contract, every partnership, every vulnerability. By morning, I had a plan. The first call I made was to Marcus Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Medical Systems, Parker Industries' biggest competitor. Marcus? It's Avery Mitchell. I believe we have some mutual interests to discuss. Marcus and I had met at various industry events over the years. He had tried to recruit me multiple times, always with the same line. You're wasted at Parker. The innovations you've developed? They're just the tip of the iceberg of what you could do with the right support. I had always politely declined, citing my loyalty to Brandon and our future together. Marcus was surprised to hear from me, but agreed to meet for lunch that day. I arrived early at Montero's, an upscale restaurant on the outskirts of town where I was unlikely to run into anyone connected to Parker Industries. I'll be honest, Avery, Marcus said after we'd ordered. I never thought I'd get this call. What changed? I considered giving him some business-focused explanation, something about seeking new challenges or maximizing the potential of my innovations. Instead, I told him the truth. Brandon's been cheating on me for at least 7 months. He's been stringing me along until he figures out how to remove me from the company without risking the innovations I've brought to it. Marcus's expression shifted from surprise to genuine sympathy. I'm sorry. That's awful. Thank you. But I didn't ask you here for sympathy. I pulled out a folder from my briefcase. I asked you here to discuss this. Inside was a detailed proposal. My shares in Parker Industries, shares I'd been given as compensation for my contributions amounting to 23% of the company, sold to Reynolds Medical. Additionally, I would bring with me the patents for 3 innovations I had been developing privately, outside of Parker Industries. With these innovations and my shares, you could initiate a hostile takeover. Marcus studied the documents, a slow smile spreading across his face. This would give us just over 40% ownership when combined with the shares we've already quietly acquired. He looked up at me. But why not just take your innovations and start your own company? Why come to me? The waiter arrived with our food, and I waited until he left before answering. 2 reasons. First, timing. Starting from scratch would take years. Working with Reynolds puts these innovations in production within months. I took a sip of water. Second, I want Brandon to know exactly what he's lost. And who better to deliver that message than his biggest competitor? Marcus leaned back in his chair. And what do you want in return, besides the obvious financial compensation for your shares and patents? Chief Innovation Officer at Reynolds, full creative control over my department, and a seat on the board. That's a significant ask. It's a significant offer. Marcus studied me for a long moment before extending his hand. We have a deal. I'll have the paperwork drawn up immediately. For the next 2 weeks, I continued as if nothing had changed. I went to work at Parker Industries, I attended meetings. I even managed pleasant small talk with Brandon during the few hours he was actually home, all while quietly finalizing the details with Reynolds Medical's legal team. Brandon, meanwhile, seemed increasingly distant. More late nights at the office. More vague excuses. Then came the text that ignited the final phase of my plan. We need to talk about our anniversary dinner next Saturday. Can't make it. Big client meeting came up. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. 15 years together, 10 years engaged, and he couldn't make our anniversary dinner because of a client meeting. I responded, "That's disappointing. Which client? Thompson Medical. Potential big contract. Sorry, babe. We'll celebrate another time." Thompson Medical wasn't even in negotiations with Parker Industries. I knew because I had personally reviewed all potential contracts the previous week. I understand. Work comes first. That afternoon, I called Lucia's, the upscale Italian restaurant where we had reservations. "Hi, this is Avery Mitchell. I have a reservation for 2 this Saturday, but I need to change it to a table for 3. Saturday morning, I signed the final paperwork with Reynolds Medical. By noon, Marcus Reynolds owned 43% of Parker Industries, making Reynolds Medical the majority shareholder. By 3 p.m., an emergency board meeting had been called for Monday morning. Brandon, oblivious to all of this, was supposedly preparing for his client meeting. I spent 3 hours getting ready. Hair, makeup, outfit, all perfect. I chose a crimson dress that Brandon had always loved, elegant Louboutin heels, and the diamond earrings he had given me for our 10th anniversary. I arrived at Lucia's at precisely 7:45 p.m., 15 minutes before our reservation. I asked the maitre d' to seat me at our table immediately. "Of course, Ms. Mitchell. And will Mr. Parker be joining you shortly?" "Oh, yes," I smiled. "Mr. Parker will definitely be here, along with his guest." I was halfway through my glass of Cabernet when I saw them enter. Brandon, handsome in a tailored gray suit, his arm around a stunning blonde in a sleek black dress. Kayla, I presumed. They were laughing about something, completely at ease with each other. They didn't notice me immediately. The maître d' led them through the restaurant toward my table. I watched Brandon's expression as he approached. Confusion, then shock, then a poorly concealed panic. "Avery, what are you—" I thought that I believed your lie about a client meeting with Thompson Medical, the company that isn't even in negotiations with Parker Industries. I stood, extending my hand to the blonde. "You must be Kayla. I've heard absolutely nothing about you. I'm Avery Mitchell, Brandon's fiancé of 10 years. The color drained from her face. "Fiancé? But Brandon said, let me guess. He said we were over? That he was just maintaining appearances temporarily for business reasons?" I gestured to the chair across from me. "Please, both of you, sit down. Since we're all here, we might as well enjoy our anniversary dinner together." Brandon looked like he might bolt, but the last thing he wanted was a scene in Lucia's, where half of Oakridge's business elite dined regularly. Reluctantly, he pulled out a chair for a shell-shocked Kayla before taking his own seat. "Avery, I can explain." "I'm sure you can, Brandon. You've always been good at explanations." I signaled the waiter. "Another glass of Cabernet, please, and whatever my guests would like." Neither Brandon nor Kayla moved to look at the wine list. "No? Well, perhaps you need a moment. It's been quite a day for me. Quite a 3 weeks, actually. Ever since I found your messages, Kayla." Brandon's face hardened. "You went through my private messages?" "No, actually. You left your laptop open. But that's hardly the point, is it? The point is what I found. All those conversations about how you were just stringing me along until you figured out how to remove me from the company without losing my innovations." I smiled at Kayla. "Did he tell you that part? About how he's been engaged to me for 10 years with no intention of ever following through?" Kayla looked at Brandon, confusion and hurt evident in her expression. "You said it was a business arrangement. That you were partners, Nothing more. Oh, we're partners, all right. Business partners, life partners. Or at least we were. I took another sip of wine. But that's not even the most interesting part of my day. Would you like to know what I did this morning, Brandon? Something in my tone must have alarmed him, because he suddenly looked very wary. Avery, whatever you're thinking of doing— Oh, I'm not thinking of doing anything. I've already done it. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small envelope, sliding it across the table. Consider it an anniversary present. With visible reluctance, Brandon opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Confirmation of the share transfer to Reynolds Medical. I watched as he read it, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to horror. You can't have done this, he whispered. This isn't possible. What is it? Kayla asked, trying to see the document. She sold her shares, Brandon said, his voice hollow. To Reynolds. Not just my shares, I corrected. I also brought 3 new patents with me. Patents that, combined with my shares, gave Reynolds enough leverage to acquire additional shares from other investors. As of noon today, Reynolds Medical owns 43% of Parker Industries. I leaned forward, dropping my voice. There's an emergency board meeting Monday morning. I'll be there, as the new Chief Innovation Officer of Reynolds Medical Systems. Brandon's face had gone gray. You've destroyed everything my family built. Everything we built together. No, Brandon. You did that when you decided I was expendable, when you decided our relationship was just a convenient business arrangement. I stood, placing my napkin on the table. I've already settled the bill. Enjoy your dinner. I recommend the osso buco. It's what we had on our first date, remember? I began to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and Kayla, a word of advice. When he tells you you're special, that you're different from all the others, don't believe him. I wasn't the first woman he strung along, and you won't be the last. With that, I walked out of Lucia's, past the curious glances of Oakridge's elite, into the warm summer evening. For the first time in 15 years, I felt completely free. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Marcus Reynolds. Board meeting moved up to tomorrow, 9 a.m. Parker's trying to rally support. I smiled as I typed my reply. Let him try. See you tomorrow, partner. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and turned up the music. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight was for celebrating my independence. And the look on Brandon's face when he realized he'd lost everything? That was just the cherry on top. Sleep evaded me that night. Not from guilt, I was long past that, but from anticipation. I sat on the balcony of my hotel suite at the Oakridge Grand, watching the sunrise paint the skyline in hues of amber and gold. I'd booked the room immediately after leaving Lucia's. Returning to the house Brandon and I shared felt impossible now. Everything there was tainted. Photos, furniture, even the coffee mugs we'd collected from our travels. All of it would need to be sorted through, divided, and discarded. But that was a problem for another day. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Car will pick you up at 7:30. Breakfast before battle? I smiled at his phrasing. Absolutely. I'll be ready at precisely 7:30. A sleek black Audi pulled up to the hotel entrance. Marcus stepped out, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. You look remarkably well-rested for someone who just detonated a corporate nuclear bomb, he said, opening the car door for me. Appearances can be deceiving, I replied, sliding into the leather seat. Though I suspect I slept better than Brandon did. Marcus chuckled as he joined me in the back seat. Based on the series of increasingly desperate calls I ignored from him last night, I'd say that's a safe bet. We had breakfast at Westfield's, a discreet restaurant known for hosting power brokers and their confidential conversations. Over gourmet omelets and fresh-pressed juice, Marcus briefed me on what to expect. Richard Parker called an emergency. Board meeting for 9 a.m. The official agenda is discussion of recent share acquisition and leadership structure, but unofficially, it's damage control. Marcus pulled out his tablet, displaying a series of emails. Their legal team has been working through the night trying to find grounds to challenge the acquisition. And did they? I took a sip of my coffee, the rich flavor a stark contrast to the instant coffee I'd had at the hotel. Nothing solid. We did everything by the book. He studied me for a moment. Brandon tried to claim you had access to insider information that you used inappropriately, but our lawyers pointed out that would open a whole can of worms about why you, as his fiancé and a key executive, were making decisions based on his infidelity rather than company information. I smiled. He always overplays his hand when backed into a corner. Speaking of corners, Marcus continued, Richard Parker has been calling in favors from every board member. He's trying to maintain family control. That won't surprise anyone. Who knows Richard? The company has been his life since he was 22. Despite everything, I felt a twinge of sympathy for Brandon's father. He had always treated me like a daughter. Does he know about Brandon and Kayla? Marcus shrugged. Not from us. But gossip travels fast in Oakridge, especially after your dinner theater last night. At 8:45, we arrived at Parker Industries headquarters, a sleek glass and steel building that dominated the Oakridge skyline. I had helped design many elements of it during the renovation 5 years ago, choosing materials that would reflect the company's forward-thinking approach while honoring its heritage. As we walked through the lobby, heads turned, whispers followed. Most employees knew me. None expected to see me walking side by side with Marcus Reynolds, their company's biggest competitor. Jessica, Richard's executive assistant for over 20 years, blanched when she saw us approach the executive elevator. Ms. Mitchell, Mr. Reynolds. I wasn't told you'd be— We're here for the board meeting, Jessica, I said gently. I had always liked her. We're expected. She nodded mutely, pressing the button to call the elevator. The boardroom was on the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling, windows offering panoramic views of the Connecticut River. When Marcus and I entered, a tense silence fell over the room. Richard Parker sat at the head of the massive oak table, looking every one of his 68 years. The heart attack had aged him, but the shock on his face as he saw me enter with Marcus added a decade more. Brandon sat to his right, eyes bloodshot, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled. The other board members, 7 in total, displayed varying degrees of surprise and discomfort. Only Diane Harper, the 70-year-old matriarch who had been with the company since its early days, showed no reaction beyond a slight raising of her eyebrows. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard demanded, his voice barely controlled. "Marcus, you were not invited to this meeting." "Actually, Richard," Marcus replied smoothly, "as the representative of Reynolds Medical, which now holds 43% of Parker Industries shares, I very much was invited." He placed a folder on the table. "The official notice was delivered to your legal team last night." "This is preposterous," Brandon interjected, rising from his chair. "Avery, what the hell are you doing?" I met his gaze steadily. "Securing my future, Brandon, just as you've been planning to secure yours. Without me." Richard looked between us, confusion evident. "Would someone please explain what's going on?" Diane Harper, ever the voice of reason, spoke up. "Perhaps we should all take our seats and begin the meeting properly." She fixed Brandon with a stern look. "Young man, control yourself. This is a boardroom, not a tavern." Reluctantly, Brandon sat. Marcus and I took seats at the opposite end of the table from the Parkers. Richard called the meeting to order, his voice strained. "As you all know, we're here because Reynolds Medical has apparently acquired a significant portion of Parker Industries' shares." He glared at Marcus. "A move we believe may have involved improper use of insider information." That's a serious allegation, Richard, Marcus replied calmly. And completely unfounded. Every share acquisition was done legally, through proper channels, with full disclosure to the SEC, using information provided by a disgruntled employee, Brandon snapped. Fiancé, I corrected. Or have you forgotten that part? The part where we've been engaged for 10 years while you've been stringing me along? I turned to the board members, while also apparently conducting a relationship with another woman for at least 7 months. A murmur ran through the room. Richard's face fell as he looked at his son. Brandon, is this true? Brandon's face flushed. Dad, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time, I interrupted. Because it explains my motivation in crystal clear terms. I sold my shares not out of malice toward Parker Industries, but because I discovered that my supposed future husband had been deceiving me for months, with plans to remove me from both his life and this company as soon as he figured out how to retain control of my innovations. I pulled out my tablet and slid it toward Diane, including these text messages where he explicitly states his intentions. Diane put on her reading glasses and reviewed the messages, her expression growing, increasingly severe. She passed the tablet to the board member beside her, who did the same. That's private, Brandon protested. Hardly when it directly impacts company matters, Diane replied coldly, which apparently your personal life decidedly does. As the tablet made its way around the table, the atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. By the time it reached Richard, Brandon's face had lost all color. Richard read in silence, each swipe of his finger seeming to age him further. When he finally looked up, the disappointment in his eyes was palpable. Is this how I raised you to behave? He asked quietly. To treat the woman who has helped build this company, who has been part of our family, as disposable? Dad, it's not. What? Not as it seems? These are your words, Brandon, your intentions, spelled out plainly. Richard turned to me. Avery, I had no idea. I swear to you, if I had known. I believe you, Richard, I said gently, which is why I want to make something clear to everyone. My dispute is not with Parker Industries as a whole, nor with any of you personally. My dispute is with Brandon, who used our relationship to exploit my innovations while planning to discard me when convenient. Marcus took his cue. Which brings us to the purpose of this meeting. Reynolds Medical now holds 43% of Parker Industries shares. Combined with the proxies we've secured from minority shareholders, we have effective control of the company. You can't just take over a century-old family business, Brandon protested. Actually, they can, Diane corrected. That's precisely how corporate share structures work, Brandon. Something you should certainly know by now. Marcus continued. We have 2 proposals on the table. First, a complete merger of Parker Industries into Reynolds Medical, with a restructuring of the executive team. He paused. Or second, a collaborative partnership where Parker Industries maintains its brand, identity but operates under the Reynolds umbrella with a joint executive board. Richard leaned forward. And what happens to the Parker family's involvement in either scenario? That depends, I answered, looking directly at Richard. On which Parker we're discussing. Brandon stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. Dad, you can't seriously be considering negotiating with them? After what she's done? After what she's done. Richard's voice rose for the first time. Avery has been more loyal to this company than you have, apparently, while you've been... He gestured at the tablet. Making plans to remove her and carrying on with another woman, she's been developing the innovations that have kept us competitive. The innovations that she's now taken to Reynolds, Brandon countered. Innovations that I developed independently, on my own time, I clarified. Separate from my work at Parker Industries. I have the documentation to prove it. It's true, Marcus added. Our legal team has verified the independence of these patents. Richard looked exhausted. I think we need a brief recess. 15 minutes. He fixed his son with a stern look. "Brandon, my office, now." As the room emptied, I stepped out onto the balcony that adjoined the boardroom. The summer air was heavy with humidity, promising afternoon thunderstorms. Below, Oakridge continued its daily business, unaware of the corporate drama unfolding above. Marcus joined me, loosening his tie slightly. "Well, that went about as expected." I nodded. "Brandon never could handle being caught in a lie. He always doubles down instead of owning his mistakes." "A fatal flaw in business and life," Marcus observed. "Richard, though, I didn't expect him to side with you so quickly." "Richard values loyalty above all else. It's why Parker Industries has employees who've been with the company for decades." I gazed out at the city. "He's also always had a blind spot where Brandon is concerned. This must be devastating for him." "Do you regret it? Any of it?" I considered the question carefully. "I regret that it came to this. I regret the years I spent believing in a future that was never going to happen." I turned to face him. "But taking control of my own destiny, refusing to be discarded? No, I don't regret that at all." The boardroom gradually refilled. Brandon and Richard were the last to return. Brandon's face was flushed, his jaw clenched. Richard, by contrast, looked calm, resigned even. "Before we continue," Richard began, once everyone was seated, "I want to make something clear. My son's personal conduct in this matter has been reprehensible. I've made my feelings abundantly clear to him." He looked around the table. "However, Parker Industries is bigger than any one person. It represents a legacy of innovation, quality, and service that has spanned nearly a century. That legacy deserves to continue." Marcus nodded respectfully. "We agree completely, Richard, which is why our second proposal maintains the Parker brand and legacy." "With conditions, I assume?" Richard asked. "With appropriate restructuring," Marcus confirmed. Parker Industries would maintain its brand identity and continue operating its current facilities. Core staff would remain in place. The primary changes would be at the executive level. Richard nodded slowly. "And those changes would include a joint executive board with 3 members from Reynolds, 3 from Parker, and 1 independent. Member agreed upon by both sides," Marcus explained. "Day-to-day operations would be supervised by this board, with specialized divisions led by the most qualified individuals, regardless of which company they originally came from." "And the role of the Parker family?" Richard pressed. Marcus glanced at me before responding. "We propose that you, Richard, remain as chairman emeritus, with an advisory role and full voting rights on the board." He paused. "As for Brandon, we feel it would be best if he pursued opportunities elsewhere." Brandon started to protest, but Richard silenced him with a raised hand. "And Avery's role in this new structure? Chief Innovation Officer for the combined entity?" Marcus replied. "With a seat on the joint board." Richard considered this for a long moment. The room was so quiet I could hear the antique clock on the wall ticking away the seconds. Finally, he spoke. "I would like to propose an amendment to your second option." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "We're listening." "The Parker family has controlled this company for 4 generations. I understand that circumstances have changed, but I would like to maintain some level of family involvement beyond my own limited remaining years." Richard straightened his shoulders. "I propose that my daughter, Lauren, be considered for a position on the joint board." Lauren Parker had chosen a different path from her brother, becoming a successful surgeon instead of joining the family business. But she had always maintained a connection to Parker Industries, serving as a medical consultant on new product development. "Lauren would bring valuable medical expertise and perspective," Richard continued. "And while she hasn't been directly involved in company operations, she understands our values and vision." Marcus and I exchanged glances. This was unexpected, but not unwelcome. "We would need to interview Dr. Parker formally," Marcus said. "But, speaking personally, I have great respect for her work. I believe she could be an asset to the joint venture. And Brandon? Richard asked quietly. Will receive a fair severance package and any vested benefits he's entitled to, Marcus replied, firmly. But he cannot remain with the company in any capacity. Richard nodded slowly, then turned to his son. Brandon, do you have anything constructive to add to this discussion? Brandon looked around the table, seeming to realize for the first time that he had no allies here. His eyes settled on me, and for a brief moment, I saw not anger, but genuine regret. He began, then faltered. I made mistakes, serious ones. I took Avery for granted, both personally and professionally. He swallowed hard. But I care about this company. It's my heritage too. A heritage you were willing to compromise for personal gain, Diane Harper observed coolly. Brandon had no response to that. Richard turned back to Marcus and me. I believe we have the outline of an agreement. I'd like our legal teams to draft the necessary documents for review. In the meantime, I suggest we issue a joint statement to employees and shareholders before rumors get out of hand. Agreed, Marcus said. We can have a draft statement ready within the hour. As the meeting adjourned, board members filed out, some stopping to speak quietly with Richard, others avoiding eye contact with Brandon entirely. Soon, only the four of us remained. Marcus, me, Richard, and Brandon. Richard looked at his son. Brandon, give us a moment. After Brandon reluctantly left, Richard turned to me. 15 years ago, when you and Brandon started dating, I told my wife I hoped someday you would be my daughter-in-law. Not just because you made Brandon happy, but because I saw in you the kind of integrity and vision that has always been the backbone of Parker Industries. He sighed heavily. I failed to see that my son didn't share those values. For that, I'm deeply sorry. You have nothing to apologize for, Richard, I said quietly. Brandon made his choices. So did I. Indeed you did, he acknowledged. And while I can't pretend to be happy about how things have turned out, I respect your decision to stand up for yourself. He extended his hand to me. I hope that in your new role, you'll continue to bring the same passion and innovation that has helped us thrive these past years. I took his hand, feeling a complex mix of emotions. I will. And I promise you, Richard, the Parker legacy will be respected. He nodded, then turned to Marcus. As for you, Reynolds, you'd better take good care of what you've acquired. Both the company and this remarkable woman. Marcus smiled. On that, sir, we are in complete agreement. After Richard left, Marcus and I stood in silence for a moment, looking out at the skyline of Oakridge. So, Marcus said finally, how does it feel to change the course of two companies in less than 24 hours? I considered the question. Empowering, terrifying, bittersweet. I turned to him. But mostly it feels like the beginning of something new. Something I'm building on my own terms. Not entirely on your own, he reminded me with a smile. You do have a partner in this venture. True, I acknowledged. Though I should warn you, I don't have the best track record with partners lately. Marcus laughed. Noted. But I think we'll be fine as long as I remember one crucial lesson from all this. Which is, never ever cross Avery Mitchell. As we walked out of the boardroom, I caught a glimpse of Brandon standing alone in Richard's office, staring out the window. For a moment, our eyes met through the glass. I didn't smile or glare or make any gesture at all. I simply held his gaze, for a beat, then turned away. Some chapters don't need a final word. Sometimes walking away is enough. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of transitions, negotiations, and new beginnings. The merger of Parker Industries and Reynolds Medical, now officially rebranded as Parker Reynolds Innovation, dominated business headlines for weeks. Industry analysts debated the wisdom of the partnership, with some predicting cultural clashes while others praised the complementary strengths of both companies. What none of them knew was the personal drama that had catalyzed the corporate reshuffling. I threw myself into my new role as Chief Innovation Officer with an intensity that surprised even me. Perhaps it was the need to prove I deserved the position beyond my shares or personal history. Or maybe it was simply the liberation of finally working without constraints, developing the medical technologies I'd envisioned for years. The Joint Executive Board proved more effective than anyone anticipated. Richard Parker, as Chairman Emeritus, provided invaluable historical perspective, while embracing the fresh approaches Marcus and I championed. Lauren Parker, after initial hesitation, accepted the board position and quickly became a vital bridge between the medical community and our research division. Brandon disappeared from Oakridge the day after the board meeting. According to local gossip, he'd moved to Seattle with Kayla. I heard occasional updates through mutual acquaintances. Apparently, he'd started a small consultancy firm and was finding himself. I wished him well, in theory. In practice, I avoided thinking about him altogether until the invitation arrived. It was a crisp October morning, and I was reviewing prototype designs in my new corner office when my assistant Tara brought in the day's mail. "This one's different," she said, placing a cream-colored envelope on top of the stack, hand-delivered by courier. The envelope bore only my name in elegant calligraphy. No return address, no company logo. Inside was a simple card. "The Parker family cordially invites you to celebrate Richard Parker's 69th birthday. Saturday, October 21st, 7 p.m. The Parker estate. I stared at the invitation, conflicting emotions washing over me. In the months since the merger, Richard and I had established a cordial professional relationship, but social interactions had been limited to company events. This was different, personal, intimate. My intercom buzzed. "Ms. Mitchell, Dr. Parker is here to see you." Lauren Parker had her father's commanding presence and his piercing blue eyes. But where Richard was old-school corporate, Lauren was pure medical professional, direct, efficient, and unflinchingly honest. "I assume you received the invitation," she said without preamble as she entered my office. "Just now." I gestured to the card on my desk. "I'm a bit surprised, to be honest." Lauren sat in the chair across from me, her posture perfect as always. "It was my idea, actually. Dad's been through hell these past months. The merger, Brandon's departure, Mom's declining health. This was news to me. Margaret's ill? I didn't know. Early-stage Alzheimer's. They've kept it private." Lauren's expression softened slightly. "Despite everything that happened, Dad still considers you family, Avery. He misses you." I felt a twinge of guilt. While I'd maintained professional courtesy with Richard, I'd deliberately kept emotional distance. It had seemed the cleanest approach after the messy business with Brandon. "Will Brandon be there?" I asked the question I couldn't help but ask. "No. He declined the invitation." Lauren's tone made it clear she had opinions about her brother's choice. "He sends his regrets. Apparently, Seattle is too far to travel for a mere birthday celebration." I nodded, processing this information. "And you're okay with me being there? After everything?" Lauren studied me for a moment before answering. "Initially? No. You humiliated my brother and took control of our family's legacy." A small smile softened her words. "But then I read those text messages, saw how he'd been planning to discard you once he'd extracted what he needed from your relationship. And I've watched you these past months, how you've honored your promise to respect the Parker legacy while pushing the company forward." She shrugged. "So yes, I'm okay with it now. Thank you for your honesty. Always." Lauren stood to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Marcus Reynolds is also invited." I raised an eyebrow. "As my +1?" "As himself." Dad's developed quite the respect for him during the transition. Lauren gave me a knowing look. "Though the staff may make certain assumptions if you arrive together." After she left, I found myself turning the invitation over in my hands repeatedly. The Parker estate held so many memories: summer barbecues, holiday celebrations, the night Brandon and I had first connected on that moonlit porch. Could I really return there now, in this new capacity? My phone chimed with a text from Marcus. "Just got a surprising invitation. You?" I smiled despite myself. "Same. Thoughts? I think we should go. Professional courtesy. Also, Richard makes an excellent, old-fashioned." Lauren thinks people will assume we're together if we arrive together. There was a long pause before his response. Would that be a problem? An interesting question. In the months since the merger, Marcus and I had developed a solid working relationship built on mutual respect and shared vision. We'd had countless late-night strategy sessions, working dinners, and early morning crisis meetings. Somewhere along the way, I'd come to value his quick mind, dry humor, and unfailing support. But anything beyond that had seemed complicated, inappropriate even, given our professional entanglement and my recent history. Not a problem. Just noting. The optics. In that case, shall I pick you up at 6:30? The Reynolds corporate jet is small, but it does have champagne. I laughed out loud. You're not flying your private jet from downtown Oakridge to the Parker estate. It's a 20-minute drive. Spoil sport. It is. The exchange left me with a smile that lasted through my next 2 meetings. The evening of Richard's birthday arrived with perfect autumn weather. Crisp air, clear skies, and trees ablaze with color. I spent far too long deciding what to wear, finally settling on a sapphire blue cocktail dress that conveyed respect without trying too hard. Marcus arrived precisely at 6:30, driving himself rather than using his usual car service. He looked different outside the office, more relaxed in a charcoal blazer and open-collared shirt. "You clean up well, Mitchell," he said with an appreciative glance as I opened the door. "You sound surprised, Reynolds." "Not surprised. Just appreciative." He offered his arm with mock formality. "Shall we face the lion's den together?" The drive to the Parker estate was filled with comfortable conversation about everything except work. A welcome change. Marcus talked about his childhood in Minnesota, his passion for restoring vintage motorcycles, his terrible attempts at learning French. I shared stories about my college years at MIT, my volunteer work teaching coding to high school girls, my secret talent for making authentic paella. As we turned onto the long, tree-lined driveway leading to the Parker mansion, I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. The last time I'd been here was for a dinner party 3 weeks before discovering Brandon's betrayal. Everything had seemed normal then, or perhaps I'd just been willfully blind. "Having second thoughts?" Marcus asked quietly, noticing my tension. "No, just memories." He nodded in understanding. "We can leave anytime you say the word." The Parker estate was glowing with warmth. Lanterns lined the circular driveway, and soft lights illuminated the historic colonial mansion. Cars, already, filled the parking area, indicating we were far from the first to arrive. A young valet took Marcus's keys, and we walked up the familiar stone steps to the massive oak door. Before we could ring the bell, it swung open to reveal Margaret Parker herself, elegant as ever in a simple black dress, her silver hair swept into a classic chignon. "Avery," she said warmly, reaching for my hands. "I'm so glad you came." Ollie. My prepared greetings vanished. This woman had been like a second mother to me for 15 years. "Margaret," I managed, squeezing her hands gently. "You look wonderful." "Liar," she said with a twinkle in her eye. "But I appreciate the sentiment." She turned to Marcus. "And Mr. Reynolds, Richard speaks very highly of you. Welcome to our home." Marcus charmed her immediately, as he did most people. Within minutes, we were ushered into the grand living room where 30 or so guests mingled, champagne flutes in hand. I recognized most of them: Parker family friends, business associates, longtime employees. Richard spotted us from across the room and made his way over, looking healthier than he had in months. "Avery," he said, pulling me into a brief hug that surprised me with its genuine warmth. "And Marcus. Thank you both for coming." He lowered his voice. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I admitted honestly. "But I'm glad I did." "As am I." Richard's gaze held mine for a moment, conveying what words couldn't. Then he switched to host mode. "Please, enjoy yourselves. Dinner will be served at 8. The evening progressed more comfortably than I'd anticipated. After initial curious glances and a few whispered conversations, most guests treated me like any other friend of the family. Lauren made a point of including me in conversations, and Margaret kept appearing at my elbow with fresh drinks or introductions to people she thought I should meet. During dinner, I found myself seated between Marcus and Dr. William Chen, a neurosurgeon who had worked with Lauren on several innovative procedures. The conversation flowed easily, touching on emerging medical technologies, the ethics of AI in healthcare, and the challenges of translating research into practical applications. "I've been following your cardiac monitoring system with great interest," Dr. Chen said as dessert was served. "The implications for early intervention in at-risk patients are remarkable." "That's kind of you to say," I replied, "though it's still in development." "The preliminary studies are promising," Lauren added from across the table. "The Parker Reynolds research team believes it could reduce cardiac emergency response times by up to 40%. "Parker Reynolds," Richard mused, raising his glass. "Slightly. Still getting used to that name, but I must admit, it has a certain ring to it." "To Parker Reynolds," Marcus proposed, lifting his glass. "And to the birthday boy." Glasses clinked around the table as everyone joined the toast. After dinner, guests dispersed throughout the first floor of the mansion. Some gathered in small groups on the back terrace, enjoying brandy and cigars. Others gravitated to the game room, where Richard's antique billiards table had been restored to its former glory. I found myself drawn to the music room where a baby grand piano stood in silent invitation. In another life, I'd often played here during family gatherings. Nothing professional, just casual melodies to accompany conversation and laughter. On impulse, I sat at the bench and let my fingers drift over the keys, finding the opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune. The piece had always calmed me, and I lost myself in the gentle rise and fall of the melody. I didn't notice Richard enter until he spoke from the doorway. "I've missed hearing you play." I finished the phrase before looking up. "It's been a while." "Too long." Richard crossed to a leather armchair near the piano. "Do you mind if I sit for a bit?" "Of course not. It's your house, and you were once as much a part of it as anyone." He settled into the chair with a slight wince. "These old bones aren't what they used to be." I resumed playing, softer now, allowing for conversation. "Lauren told me about Margaret's diagnosis." "I'm so sorry, Richard." He nodded, his gaze distant. "Early days yet. The doctors are optimistic about new treatments." He focused back on me. "But enough about our troubles. You seem well, Avery. The new position suits you?" "It does," I acknowledged. "The freedom to pursue my own research directions has been liberating." "And Reynolds? He's treating you properly as a colleague, I trust?" I smiled at his protective tone. "More than properly. We work well together." "And beyond work?" Richard asked with the directness that had always characterized him. "That's evolving," I admitted, surprised by my own candor. Richard nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. Life is too short to dwell in the past. Speaking of which," he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small envelope. "This is for you." I stopped playing and accepted the envelope. Inside was a folded document and a handwritten note. "Avery, some legacies shouldn't be lost in corporate reshuffling. These should have been yours long ago. Richard." The document was a legal transfer of patents, specifically the 3 innovations I had developed while at Parker Industries, but were registered under the company name. Richard had somehow extracted them from the merger agreement and transferred full ownership rights to me personally. "I don't understand," I said, looking up at him. "These were part of the Parker Industries portfolio. They were transferred in the merger." "Not quite. I had our legal team carve them out at the last minute as a personal holding. Marcus knew. He agreed once I explained my reasoning." Richard leaned forward. "These were always your intellectual property, Avery. You developed them on your own time, with your own brilliance. My son's poor judgment shouldn't deprive you of what's rightfully yours." I stared at the document, emotion welling in my throat. These patents represented years of work, millions in potential licensing revenues, and the core of my professional legacy. "Thank you," I managed finally. "This means more than I can express." "No thanks needed. It's simply right." Richard stood, with some effort. "Now I should rejoin my other guests before Margaret sends a search party." After he left, I remained at the piano, fingers resting silently on the keys as I processed what had just happened. The patents were mine, truly mine, not tied to Parker Industries or Reynolds Medical or the merged entity. It was a gesture of profound respect and, in its way, an apology for his son's betrayal. "There you are," Marcus said, appearing in the doorway. "I've been looking all over." I held up the envelope. "Did you know about this?" He nodded, coming to sit beside me on the piano bench. "Richard approached me about it a week after the merger was finalized. Said there were some things that transcended business arrangements. You could have told me. He asked me not to. Wanted it to be his gesture, not something negotiated through intermediaries." Marcus studied my face. "Are you upset?" "The opposite." I carefully returned the documents to the envelope. "Just processing." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the party filtering in from other rooms. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Play something. Any requests?" "Dealer's choice." I considered, then began the opening bars of "What a Wonderful World." Marcus smiled in recognition, and to my surprise, he began to sing softly, his voice a pleasant baritone that matched the gentle melody. As we finished the song, applause came from the doorway. Lauren stood there with a few other guests who had been drawn by the music. "Don't stop on our account," she said. "It's the best entertainment we've had all evening." What followed was an impromptu music session, with various guests requesting favorites. I played while others sang or simply listened. Margaret appeared with a tray of nightcaps, and Richard returned to his leather chair, beaming as his birthday celebration evolved into something warmer and more intimate than the formal dinner had been. Hours later, as the party wound down, Marcus and I found ourselves on the front porch, saying our goodbyes to Richard and Margaret. "This was lovely," Margaret said, embracing me. "Please don't be a stranger, dear. This house has missed your laughter." "I won't," I promised, meaning it this time. Richard shook Marcus's hand firmly. "Take care of her," he said, not bothering to disguise his meaning. "I believe she takes care of herself quite well," Marcus replied with a smile. "But I'll do my best to keep up." As we drove away, the mansion's lights growing smaller in the rearview mirror, Marcus glanced over at me. "Regrets about going?" "None," I said honestly. "It was healing in a way I didn't expect." Facing the past often is. Speaking of the unexpected, I turned toward him. "You never told me you could sing?" He grinned. "A man has to maintain some mystery." "What other talents are you hiding, Reynolds?" "That," he said, reaching over to take my hand, "is something you'll have to discover for yourself." His hand was warm around mine, and I didn't pull away. Instead, I laced my fingers through his and looked out at the star-filled October sky. 6 months ago, I walked into a restaurant prepared to burn my past to the ground. Tonight, I'd walked out of that same past with unexpected gifts, reconciliation, respect, and the possibility of something new. "So," Marcus said as we turned onto the main road, "your place or mine for that nightcap?" I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Yours. I've heard rumors about your whiskey collection that need investigating." "Rumors, huh? From whom?" "A reliable source. Richard Parker. He says you make excellent old-fashioned." Marcus grinned. "Among other things?" As we drove through the quiet streets of Oakridge, I realized something profound. The revenge I'd sought had given me exactly what I needed, not just justice for betrayal, but freedom to build something new. Something authentic. Something of mine, and that was worth celebrating indeed. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Marcus asked, leaning against the doorframe of my office as I packed the last of my personal items into a cardboard box. It was a fair question. 18 months after the merger that had rocked Oakridge's business community, I was preparing to leave my position as Chief Innovation Officer at Parker Reynolds Innovation. "I've never been more certain about anything," I replied, carefully wrapping a framed photo of my parents in tissue paper. "The patents are finalized, the funding is secured, and the research team is assembled. It's time." Marcus crossed the room and perched on the edge of my desk, picking up the sleek glass award I'd received last month at the Medical Innovation Summit. "You know the board will fight this. Let them try." I took the award from his hands and added it to my box. "My contract gives me the right to pursue independent ventures as long as they don't directly compete with Parker Reynolds' core business. Mitchell Medical Technologies will focus exclusively on pediatric applications, an area we've specifically avoided due to regulatory complexities." "Technically correct, as always." Marcus smiled, but concern shadowed his eyes. "It's not the legal aspect I'm worried about." I paused in my packing. "Then what?" "Richard. He's been grooming you as his successor for the past year. This will feel like another abandonment." The words stung because they contained truth. Since that birthday celebration a year ago, Richard Parker had become a mentor and champion. With Brandon permanently relocated to Seattle and Margaret's condition slowly worsening, Richard had increasingly leaned on me for both professional support and personal friendship. "I've already spoken with him," I said quietly. "At length. He understands this isn't about leaving Parker Reynolds. It's about finally building what I've always dreamed of." Marcus nodded, his expression softening. "And what did the old fox say to that?" "He asked for first rights to any partnership opportunities and insisted on hosting the launch party at the Parker estate." I smiled at the memory. "Then he asked if he could invest personally, not through the company. Did you accept?" "The party, yes. The investment, I told him I'd consider it." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're turning down investment from Richard Parker? The man who funded half the successful startups in the Northeast?" I carefully closed the now full box and sealed it with tape. "I need to do this on my own terms, Marcus. For once, I need to build something that isn't entangled with the Parker legacy or defined by my association with them." I looked up at him. "Surely you can understand that?" His expression told me he did. After all, Marcus had built Reynolds Medical from the ground up, refusing his father's offers of capital or connections. He'd wanted to succeed or fail on his own merits. "I do understand," he said finally, "but as CEO of Parker Reynolds, I'm obligated to point out that losing our Chief Innovation Officer will impact quarterly projections and possibly spook investors. As CEO, you should also recognize that Lauren Parker is more than ready to step into the role. She's been shadowing me for months, and her medical background gives her insights I could never have. True, though she lacks your particular brand of creative fearlessness." I rolled my eyes. "Flattery will not change my mind, Reynolds." Worth a shot. He glanced at his watch. Speaking of shots, we're going to be late for your farewell dinner if we don't leave soon. The farewell dinner was an elaborate affair at Montero's, the same upscale restaurant where I'd first proposed my deal to Marcus nearly 2 years earlier. The executive team had reserved a private room, and Richard had insisted on providing vintage champagne from his personal cellar. As Marcus and I entered, applause erupted from the gathered group, department heads, board members, and key research personnel I'd worked closely with. Richard approached immediately, champagne flute in hand. There she is, the woman of the hour, or should I say, the competition. His tone was light, but affection shone in his eyes as he handed me a glass. We're going to miss you tremendously. Avery. I'm not disappearing, Richard. My new office is literally 3 blocks away. 3 blocks and a world apart, he replied. But we'll drag you back for consultations whenever possible. Lauren approached, elegant in a tailored navy suit that contrasted with her blonde hair. Don't listen to him, she advised with a grin. He's been strutting around like a proud father ever since you announced your venture. My protege this and Avery's vision that. Richard cleared his throat. Yes, well, it's not every day one gets to witness the birth of what will undoubtedly be a revolutionary approach to pediatric medical technology. The evening progressed with toasts, good-natured roasting, and genuine expressions of appreciation for my contributions to the company. I found myself unexpectedly emotional at certain moments, particularly when Diane Harper, now semi-retired but still sharp as ever, presented me with a vintage Parker Industries memorabilia piece she'd salvaged during the merger reorganization. You've earned your place in the company's history, she said firmly, regardless of the name on the building now. As dessert was being served, my phone buzzed with a text notification. I discreetly checked it under the table and felt my stomach clench at the sender's name, Brandon Parker. After nearly 2 years of complete silence, why would he contact me now, tonight of all nights? With reluctant curiosity, I opened the message. Heard about your new venture from Dad. Congratulations. You always deserved the chance to build something that was truly yours. Be simple, straightforward, neither apologetic nor bitter. Just acknowledgement. I debated whether to respond, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Finally, I typed, Thank you, Brandon. I hope Seattle is treating you well. His reply came almost immediately. It is. Building something new here, too. Different scale, different field, but it's mine. I think you'd understand that better than most. Before I could decide how to respond to that, Marcus leaned over. Everything okay? You've gone quiet. I slipped my phone back into my purse. Fine. Just a message about the office space renovations. On a Saturday night? His skeptical expression told me he wasn't convinced, but he didn't press further. After dinner, the group began to disperse. Richard insisted on covering the bill. My last act of corporate paternalism, he joked, and people gradually drifted toward the exit with final congratulations and promises to stay in touch. Marcus touched my elbow lightly. Ready to go, or do you need a moment? I glanced around the now empty private dining room. Actually, I think I do need a minute. Meet you outside? He studied my face, then nodded. Take your time. I'll wait by the car. Once alone, I walked to the large windows overlooking Oakridge's downtown. The city had changed significantly since I'd first arrived as a teenager. New buildings had risen, old ones had been repurposed, but the essential character remained. Ambitious, resilient, forward-looking. Rather like myself, I realized with a smile. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Brandon. I heard about Mom. If there's anything she needs that Dad isn't telling me about, would you let me know? He tries to protect me too much. The request surprised me. Brandon had maintained minimal contact with his parents since moving west, according to Richard. This sudden concern seemed out of character. Margaret has good days and bad days. The new medication is helping with the cognitive symptoms, but the specialists are concerned about her heart. Why not call Richard directly? The reply took longer. This time, it's complicated. Working on rebuilding that bridge slowly. Dad and I are talking monthly now. Progress. I found myself oddly moved by this glimpse into Brandon's attempt at reconciliation. For all his flaws, he was trying to find his way back to being a son his father could be proud of. It was more than I would have expected from the man who had so callously planned to discard me. That's good to hear, Brandon. For what it's worth, Richard lights up whenever he mentions you're calling regularly. Keep at it. Thanks, Avery. For everything. Even the hard lessons. I stared at those words, unsure how to respond, or even how to feel. There was a time when the mere thought of Brandon would trigger fury or pain. Now I felt only a distant sadness for what might have been, tempered by appreciation for where his betrayal had ultimately led me. Take care of yourself, Brandon. I put my phone away without waiting for a response. Some conversations didn't need a definitive ending. Some simply evolved into something different over time. Marcus was waiting by his car as promised, looking up at the stars visible despite the city lights. He straightened as I approached. Better? He asked. Much. I linked my arm through his. Take me home? Yours or mine? It had become our private joke over the past year, ever since that first night after Richard's birthday party. Mine. I need to review the equipment manifest before Monday's delivery. He opened the passenger door with a mock bow. Your wish, my workaholic lady, is my command. The drive to my downtown loft was comfortable in its familiarity. We'd fallen into an easy rhythm in our personal relationship, neither rushing toward traditional milestones nor holding back from genuine connection. Marcus understood my need for independence as few others could, just as I respected his dedication to the company he'd built. Penny for your thoughts? He asked as we pulled into my building's garage, just reflecting on change. How different everything is from 2 years ago. Regrets? It was a question he asked occasionally, always with the same gentle curiosity. Not about us, I assured him. Not about the company decisions. I suppose I'm just recognizing that sometimes the worst betrayals can lead to the best redirections. In my apartment, while Marcus opened a bottle of wine, I kicked off my heels and checked my email one last time. Among the usual weekend messages was one that caught my attention immediately. Oh my God, I murmured, staring at the screen. Marcus looked up from pouring the wine. What is it? It's from Kayla Porter, Brandon's girlfriend. The one from that night at Lucia's. His eyebrows shot up. What on earth does she want? I quickly scanned the email, my surprise growing with each paragraph. She's a pediatric nurse. She saw the press release about Mitchell Medical Technologies, focusing on pediatric innovations, and she's offering her clinical perspective for product testing. That's unexpected. There's more. I continued reading. She and Brandon broke up about a year ago. She moved back east and has been working at Boston Children's Hospital. She says she debated contacting me for months, but decided the potential good for her patients outweighed the personal awkwardness. Marcus, handed me a glass of wine. Are you going to respond? I took a thoughtful sip. I think I will. Her clinical experience would be valuable, and she's clearly trying to be professional about the past. The universe works in mysterious ways, Marcus mused, settling beside me on the sofa. Indeed, it does. I set my laptop aside. Enough work. Talk. Tell me about your mysterious weekend plans that you've been so secretive about. His expression shifted to one I couldn't quite read. Actually, that's something I wanted to discuss with you. Sounds serious. Potentially life-changing. Marcus set down his wine glass and turned to face me fully. I've been offered a position at Johns Hopkins Medical Center, Director of Innovation and Commercial Development. They want someone to bridge the gap between their research breakthroughs and practical commercial applications. I felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath me. Baltimore? That's 400 miles away, yes. When would you start? That's the thing. He took my hands in his. I haven't accepted yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Marcus, you can't base your career decisions on our relationship. That's exactly the mistake I made with Brandon. This isn't like that, he insisted. I'm not putting my career second. I'm considering all factors, including my personal happiness. And the truth is, Avery, you're a significant part of that happiness. I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. What are you saying exactly? I'm saying I have options. I could take the Johns Hopkins position. I could remain as CEO of Parker Reynolds. Or, he paused, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. I could step down as CEO and join Mitchell Medical Technologies as a strategic advisor and investor. I stared at him. You'd leave Parker Reynolds? After everything you've built there? The company is stable. Richard is grooming Lauren for greater leadership responsibilities. The transition would be smooth. He squeezed my hands. And your startup needs experienced leadership. Not to take over. It's your vision, your company. But to help navigate the complex waters ahead. Marcus, I can't ask you to... You didn't ask? I'm offering. His expression was earnest. Look, I've run Reynolds Medical and now Parker Reynolds for over a decade. I've achieved what I set out to achieve there. Your vision for pediatric medical technology? That's the next frontier. That's where the real difference can be made. I searched his face. And us? Where do we fit into this equation? Wherever we choose. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, but I was hoping we might consider a more permanent arrangement. My breath caught as he opened the box to reveal not an engagement ring, as I'd momentarily feared, but a key. This isn't a marriage proposal, he clarified quickly. Not yet, anyway. We both know we're not ready for that step, but I bought a house. On Lakeside Drive overlooking Crystal Lake. It has 2 home offices, a dedicated research space in the converted garage, and enough room for whatever future we might want to build. He held out the key. I'm asking if you'd consider sharing it with me. I looked from the key to his face, emotion welling in my chest. Are you sure about this? All of it? I've never been more certain about anything, he said, echoing my words from earlier that evening. I took the key, feeling its weight in my palm, symbolic of so much more than just a house. I think I'd like to see this house before making any decisions. Relief and joy flooded his expression. Of course. Whenever you're ready. Tonight? He laughed. It's nearly midnight. I'm making life-changing decisions. I think that warrants a late-night house tour, don't you? Marcus stood and pulled me to my feet. Your wish is my command. As we drove through the quiet streets toward Crystal Lake, I found myself thinking about circles and endings and new beginnings. Crystal Lake, where Brandon had proposed 10 years ago, would now potentially be the site of a new home with Marcus. The betrayal that had once shattered my world had ultimately led me to greater strength, clearer purpose, and a partner who truly valued both my independence and our connection. What are you smiling about? Marcus asked as we turned onto Lakeside Drive. Just appreciating the journey. All of it, even the painful parts. That, he said, squeezing my hand, is exactly why I love you. The house appeared ahead, a beautiful craftsman-style home with warm lights glowing from within. Marcus had clearly arranged for it to be prepared for a potential visit, regardless of the hour. As we walked up the flagstone path to the front door, I felt a profound sense of rightness. Not because this house or this relationship erased the past, but because they represented a future built on honest foundations and mutual respect. Ready? Marcus asked, gesturing for me to use the key. Ready, I confirmed, stepping forward to Unlock the next chapter of my life, one entirely of my own choosing. 5 minutes, Ms. Mitchell. I nodded at the young production assistant hovering in the doorway of the green room, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. 3 years into running Mitchell Medical Technologies, I'd given dozens of presentations and interviews. But this was different. TED Talks had a way of intimidating even the most seasoned speakers. My phone chimed with an incoming text. Breathe. You've got this. Front row, stage left. Look for me if you get nervous. Marcus's message made me smile. He had flown in from Baltimore specifically for this event, taking a rare day away from his responsibilities at Johns Hopkins. Though we now shared the lakeside house, our professional lives often pulled us in different directions. His innovative partnerships program at Hopkins had taken off beyond anyone's expectations, while my pediatric medical device company had grown from a passionate startup to an industry disruptor. I checked my reflection one last time, smoothing the lapel of my burgundy blazer. At 38, I had earned every fine line around my eyes, every strand of silver now appearing in my dark hair. They were badges of a life lived with purpose and determination. The PA reappeared. They're ready for you now. The walk to the stage felt both eternal and instantaneous. As the host announced my name and credentials, I took a deep breath and stepped into the spotlight. Thank you, I began, scanning the audience until I found Marcus's encouraging smile. When I was 7 years old, my cousin Emily was born with a congenital heart defect. The doctors told my aunt and uncle that the necessary monitoring equipment would limit her mobility and quality of life throughout her childhood. I remember asking my father, why can't they make something smaller, something better? His answer shaped my future. Because no one's invented it yet. For the next 18 minutes, I shared the journey that had led to Mitchell Medical Technologies. Breakthrough pediatric cardiac monitoring system. A device so small and unobtrusive that children often forgot they were wearing it, yet powerful enough to transmit real-time data to medical providers and alert parents to concerning changes. What I didn't share was the personal catalyst, how betrayal and revenge had unexpectedly freed me to pursue this lifelong dream. How losing what I thought I wanted had opened the door to what I truly needed. The applause was gratifying, but the real reward came afterward during the reception, when parents approached to tell me how our devices had changed their children's lives. One mother, tears in her eyes, showed me photos of her daughter playing soccer, an activity that would have been impossible with previous monitoring technology. You've given her a normal childhood, she said, squeezing my hand. There's no way to thank you enough for that. As the crowd thinned, Marcus made his way to my side, handing me a much-needed glass of water. Knocked it out of the park, he said proudly, though I'm biased. Just a bit. I leaned against him briefly, grateful for his solid presence. Did you see the mother with the soccer photos? I did. Those are the moments that make all the corporate battles worthwhile, aren't they? Before I could respond, my phone vibrated with an incoming call. The screen displayed a name that still caused a complicated flutter of emotions. Richard Parker. I should take this, I said, stepping away from the noise of the reception. Richard, is everything okay? His voice sounded thinner than when I'd last visited 6 months ago, but his spirit remained indomitable. Just watched your talk being live streamed. Magnificent, my dear. Absolutely magnificent. Thank you, Richard. That means a lot coming from you. I smiled, picturing him in his study at the Parker estate, probably with a glass of his favorite scotch in hand. How are you feeling? How's Margaret? There was a slight pause. Margaret has good days and bad. More of the latter recently, I'm afraid. As for me, the doctors are pleased with my progress after the procedure. The procedure had been a triple bypass 3 months earlier. A surgery Richard had kept quiet until it was over, not wanting to cause a fuss, as he put it. I'm coming to Oakridge next week, I told him. I'd love to visit if you're up for company. Always. For you. His voice warmed. Lauren mentioned you two have a meeting about potential collaboration? We do. She has some fascinating ideas about adapting our monitoring technology for geriatric patients. That's my girl. Always. Thinking ahead. The pride in his voice was unmistakable. Under Lauren's leadership as CEO, Parker Reynolds had flourished, expanding into new markets while maintaining the quality and innovation that had been the Parker legacy. After promising to call with details of my visit, I ended the call and rejoined Marcus, who was chatting with one of the event organizers. "Richard?" he asked as the organizer moved on. I nodded, watching from Oakridge. He sounds tired, but he'd never admit it. That man will be drafting acquisition strategies on his deathbed, Marcus said with affectionate exasperation. Speaking of which, have you given any more thought to the Westfield proposal? Westfield Medical Group had approached Mitchell Medical Technologies with an offer to acquire us for a sum that would have seemed impossible 3 years ago. The deal would keep me on as Chief Innovation Officer with complete creative control over research and development. Still thinking, I admitted. Part of me sees the advantages: their distribution network, research facilities, capital for expansion. But another part is reluctant to give up control, Marcus finished for me, even partial control. Is that unreasonable, after everything? He shook his head. Not unreasonable, just worth examining your true motivations. Is maintaining total independence serving the company's mission best, or is it about something else? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself repeatedly since the offer arrived. Was I resisting because it wasn't right for the company, or because of lingering fear of being made vulnerable again? I have time to decide, I said finally. They've given us 6 weeks. And in the meantime, you have a European launch to prepare for. Marcus glanced at his watch. Speaking of which, we should head back to the hotel if you're going to make your conference call with the Berlin team. The following morning, as we prepared to part ways at the airport, Marcus returning to Baltimore, me flying to London for the first leg of our European expansion, my phone buzzed with a news alert that made my heart skip a beat. Breaking. Brandon. Parker, son of Parker Industries founder, launches revolutionary sustainable housing venture with $50 million investment from EcoFuture Capital I. Clicked through to the full article, skimming the details. After years of working behind the scenes, Brandon had emerged with an innovative approach to affordable, environmentally sustainable housing. The journalist described him as reinventing himself after stepping away from his family's medical technology business. There was a photo of Brandon at a construction site, looking leaner and more weathered than I remembered, but with a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Beside him stood a woman introduced as Dr. Maya Diaz, environmental architect and co-founder. Good. For him, I murmured, showing Marcus the article. He raised an eyebrow. You mean that? I do, actually. And I realized I truly did. Whatever bitterness I'd once felt had long since dissolved, replaced by a detached appreciation for the strange twists of fate that had brought us both to better places. He found his own path, just as I found mine. Marcus studied my face. You're remarkable, you know that? Most people would harbor at least some resentment. What would be the point? I shrugged. His betrayal ultimately gave me everything I have now. My company, my freedom, even you. I leaned in to kiss him goodbye. Safe travels. See you at home on Sunday? Wouldn't miss it. We have that charity gala, remember? I groaned. How could I forget? An entire evening in uncomfortable shoes, making small talk with potential donors. For pediatric cancer research, he reminded me gently, for which I would wear painful shoes every day of my life if necessary, I acknowledged. Text me when you land. We parted ways at security, each heading toward different gates, different cities, different responsibilities, but always circling back to the home and life we were building together. The London meetings went smoothly, with our European Medical Advisory Board enthusiastically approving the final design modifications for the EU market. I was preparing for my flight to Berlin when I received a surprising email from Lauren Parker. Avery, need to move our meeting up. Something's happened with Dad. Not an emergency, but concerning. Call me when you can. Lauren, my stomach tightened as I dialed her number, bracing for bad news. It's his heart again, Lauren said without preamble when she answered. Not another attack, but the doctor doesn't like his latest test results. They're adjusting his medication and recommending a less stressful lifestyle. She gave a short, strained laugh, as if Richard Parker has ever done anything less than full throttle. I can cut my trip short, I offered immediately. Be back in Oakridge by tomorrow evening. Actually, that's why I called. He's asking for you, and for Brandon. I've already reached out to my brother, and surprisingly, he's agreed to come. Lauren's tone conveyed her astonishment. It will be the first time he's been back to the estate since everything happened. The significance wasn't lost on me. And Richard wants me there too? Are you sure that's a good idea? Dad's exact words were, if I'm going to have a family summit about my mortality, I want my entire family present. That includes Avery. Lauren paused. For what it's worth, I agree with him. You've been more family to him these past years than Brandon has. What about Margaret? Will she be able to handle the emotional strain? Mom has her lucid days, and her doctors think familiar faces might actually help ground her. She still asks about you sometimes. After ending the call, I sat for a long moment, absorbing this unexpected turn of events. I had maintained a warm relationship with Richard and a professional friendship with Lauren, but I hadn't seen Brandon face to face since that fateful night at Lucia's nearly 4 years ago. Our communication had been limited to occasional text messages, civil, even friendly at times, but always with the unspoken weight of our history between us. And now Richard was gathering his family, including me. I changed my flight arrangements, canceling Berlin and booking a direct return to New York, from where I could connect to Oakridge. Then I called Marcus. You don't have to cut your Hopkins meetings short, I assured him after explaining the situation. This is really more of a Parker family matter, which apparently includes you, he pointed out. Are you okay with that? Seeing Brandon again, being back at the estate with all of them? I considered the question seriously. Strangely, yes. It feels appropriate somehow, like closing a circle. Then I'll be there. The research grant reviews can wait. His immediate support warmed me. You're sure? Avery Mitchell, when will you accept where you go, I go? Especially for something this important. 24 hours later, Marcus and I pulled into the circular driveway of the Parker estate. Another car was already parked there, a sleek electric vehicle with Seattle plates. Brandon had arrived before us. Lauren met us at the door, the strain of recent weeks evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. Thank you both for coming, she said, embracing me briefly before shaking Marcus's hand. Dad's in the sunroom with Mom. Brandon's with them. I felt a flutter of anxiety as we followed her through the familiar hallways. The house was largely unchanged since my last visit, though I noticed subtle accommodations for Margaret's condition, handrails. Along the walls, labels on certain doors, a medical alert system discreetly installed near the staircase. The sunroom had always been Margaret's favorite space, with its wall of windows overlooking the manicured gardens and koi pond. As we entered, I saw Richard seated in a comfortable armchair, a throw blanket across his legs despite the room's warmth. Margaret sat beside him, her once sharp gaze now softened and slightly unfocused. Across from them was Brandon, looking up as we entered. For a moment, no one spoke. Brandon stood, uncertainty clear in his posture. He had aged well, I noted objectively, the boyish handsomeness of his youth maturing into a more weathered, substantial presence. Beside him sat a woman I didn't recognize, petite, with warm brown skin and intelligent eyes. Dr. Maya Diaz, I presumed. Avery, Brandon said finally, his voice carrying a complexity of emotions. It's been a long time. It has. I moved forward, offering my hand in a gesture that felt both formal and necessary. You're looking well. He accepted the handshake, his grip firm but brief. So are you. Congratulations on all your success. I've followed your company's progress, and I yours. The Sustainable Housing Initiative is impressive. The awkwardness might have continued, but Richard intervened. Now that the obligatory pleasantries are out of the way, perhaps we can all sit down like adults and have a proper conversation. His bluntness broke the tension, drawing smiles from everyone. Brandon introduced Maya, who shook my hand with genuine warmth. I've admired your work in pediatric medical devices, she said. My sister's son uses one of your monitors for his congenital arrhythmia. This unexpected connection immediately established common ground, and the initial discomfort began to dissipate as we all took seats around the sunroom. Margaret studied me with the faint confusion that had become common as her condition progressed. Avery, she said finally, you were supposed to marry my son. A painful silence fell over the room. Mom, Lauren began gently. It's all right, I assured her, then turned to Margaret. That was the plan once, yes. But sometimes life takes us in different directions. Margaret nodded slowly, seeming to process this. And now you're with him? She gestured vaguely toward Marcus. Yes, I am. Her face cleared momentarily, a flash of her old sharpness returning. Good. He looks at you properly, like you matter. She patted my hand with surprising strength. You always were too smart for Brandon. Brandon let out a startled laugh. Thanks, Mom. Margaret turned to him, her expression softening. Oh, but you're doing better now, aren't you, dear? With your houses and your nice doctor lady? Maya smiled gently. Architect, actually, Mrs. Parker. Of course, dear. Brandon always did like smart women. Richard cleared his throat. As delightful as this impromptu therapy session is, I did call you all here for a specific purpose. He straightened in his chair, suddenly looking more like the commanding CEO he had once been. My doctors have made it clear that I need to significantly reduce my stress and activity levels. Given that advice, and Margaret's ongoing needs, I've made some decisions about the future. We all listened intently as Richard outlined his plans. He was stepping back completely from his advisory role at Parker Reynolds, transferring his remaining shares to a trust that would be controlled jointly by Lauren and Brandon. He and Margaret would be moving to a smaller property on the lake, easier to manage and specifically designed for her condition. And the estate? Lauren asked. That's the other reason I wanted everyone here today. Richard's gaze moved deliberately from Lauren to Brandon to me. This house has been in the Parker family for generations. It's witnessed births, deaths, celebrations, tragedies, betrayals, and reconciliations. It holds our entire history, both the proud moments and the painful ones. He paused, looking around the sunroom with a mixture of nostalgia and resolution. Lauren has her own home. Brandon is established in Seattle. Neither of you needs this place, nor do you want the burden of maintaining it for sentimental reasons. Alone. Brandon leaned forward. Dad, are you saying you're selling the estate? Not selling. Repurposing. Richard smiled, some of his old shrewdness sparking in his eyes. I've established a foundation, the Margaret Parker Foundation for Children's Health. This house will become its headquarters and a retreat center for families of children with serious medical conditions. The announcement took us all by surprise. Margaret clapped her hands in delight, though I wasn't certain she fully understood the implications. That's incredible, Lauren said finally. Mom would love that. She does love it, Richard corrected gently. On her good days, we've discussed it extensively. It was actually her idea, originally. He turned to me. Which brings me to why I wanted you here, Avery. The Foundation will need a strong board of directors, including medical technology experts. I'd like you to consider taking a position. I was momentarily speechless. Richard, I'm honored, but before you answer, he interrupted, you should know that I've also asked Brandon and Maya to be involved, specifically to consult on making the retreat housing as environmentally sustainable and cost-effective as possible. He looked between Brandon and me meaningfully. This foundation represents the best of the Parker legacy: innovation, compassion, and forward thinking. But for it to succeed, old wounds need to be fully healed. The symbolism wasn't subtle. Richard was offering us a chance to transform the very location of Brandon's betrayal into something positive and healing. Not just for ourselves, but for countless families in need. Brandon was the first to respond. I'm in, he said simply. Maya and I both are. All eyes turned to me. I felt Marcus's supportive presence beside me, but this decision was mine alone. The Foundation's mission aligns perfectly with Mitchell Medical's values, I said carefully. I'd be honored to serve on the board. And I looked directly at Brandon for the first time, really seeing him as he was now, not as the man who had hurt me years ago. I think it's time we moved from civility to actual collaboration. The past is the past. Relief visibly washed over Richard's face. Excellent. Lauren has already agreed to chair the board, and Marcus, we'd welcome your involvement as well if you're willing. Of course, Marcus agreed. Hopkins has been looking for partnership opportunities with private foundations focused on pediatric care. This could benefit everyone. As the conversation shifted to practical matters, timeline for Richard and Margaret's move, preliminary foundation structure, potential programming. I found myself studying the sunroom with new eyes. This space that had once represented another family's legacy would soon help create new legacies for children fighting serious illnesses. Later, as we prepared to leave, Brandon approached me in the hallway. Maya had stepped outside with Marcus to discuss green building techniques, giving us a rare moment alone. I've rehearsed what I would say to you if we ever had a real conversation again, he admitted. Had it all planned out, the perfect apology, explanations for my behavior, everything. And now? He shook his head ruefully. Now it all seems inadequate. I'm sorry, doesn't begin to cover the damage I caused. No, it doesn't, I agreed. But it's also not necessary anymore. We've both built lives we wouldn't have had otherwise. Still, I need to say it. His gaze was steady, sincere in a way the younger Brandon had never managed. I'm truly sorry, Avery. For the lies, the manipulation, the years of leading you on. You deserved better. I got better, I said simply. Just not in the way either of us expected. He nodded, accepting this truth. The foundation, it's a good idea, isn't it? Something meaningful from all that history. It's perfect. Your father always did have a gift for unexpected solutions. As we rejoined the others outside, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't known I needed. The circle that had begun with betrayal and revenge was closing with reconciliation and purpose. Not forgetting, not pretending the pain had never happened, but transforming it into something worthwhile. Marcus caught my eye as I approached, raising an eyebrow in silent question. I nodded, letting him know I was okay, more than okay, on the U. Drive home, as darkness fell over the Connecticut countryside, Marcus finally asked, "What are you thinking about? You've been quiet." I watched the familiar landmarks pass by. The lake where Brandon had proposed, the restaurant where I'd confronted him with Kayla, the Parker Reynolds headquarters where I'd helped negotiate the merger. I'm thinking about how revenge is supposedly a dish best served cold, I said thoughtfully. But healing is something else entirely. And what temperature is healing served at? he asked, playing along. I smiled, reaching for his hand across the console. Warm, definitely warm. To Avery Mitchell, who turned betrayal into an empire. The toast echoed through the elegant banquet hall as 200 guests raised their glasses. I smiled, accepting the recognition with a graceful nod, though the wording made me wince internally. After 15 years, I still preferred not to define my success in terms of that pivotal moment. The crystal chandeliers of the Boston Harbor View Hotel cast a warm glow over the gathering, a carefully curated mix of industry leaders, medical professionals, investors, and the families whose children had benefited from our technologies. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city skyline sparkled against the night sky, a fitting backdrop for a celebration of how far we'd all come. The occasion was the 15th anniversary gala for Mitchell Medical Technologies, now the world's leading developer of pediatric medical devices. What had begun as my act of reclaiming my future had grown beyond anything I could have imagined that night at Lucia's restaurant. From a startup with 3 employees working out of a converted warehouse space, we had expanded to a global operation with offices in 7 countries and technologies that had fundamentally altered the landscape of pediatric medicine. Tables adorned with blue and silver, our company colors, filled the grand ballroom. At the entrance, a timeline display chronicled our journey. From the initial cardiac monitoring prototype that had launched everything to our latest breakthrough in non-invasive neural interfaces for children with mobility challenges, each milestone represented countless hours of research, setbacks overcome, and lives transformed. As the applause subsided, I stepped to the podium. The faces before me represented every phase of my journey: colleagues from Parker Reynolds, researchers who had joined my startup in its early days, investors who had believed in my vision when it was little more than ambitious plans and prototype designs. In the middle of the room sat a table of physicians from Boston Children's Hospital who had been our first clinical partners, skeptical at first of our untested approaches, but now among our strongest advocates. "Thank you for that generous introduction, Marcus," I began, meeting the eyes of my husband of 8 years. "Though I might quibble with the framing. What we're celebrating tonight isn't a response to betrayal, but rather the power of redirection." I paused, scanning the crowd. In the front row sat Richard Parker, now 82, remarkably resilient after surviving cancer 5 years earlier. Despite his age and health challenges, his eyes remained sharp and observant, missing nothing. The experimental treatment protocol developed in part through Mitchell Medical's research division had given him years the doctors hadn't initially promised. Tonight, he wore a vintage Parker Industries lapel pin, a quiet symbol of the legacy that had evolved rather than ended. Beside him was Lauren, elegant in midnight blue, who had successfully led Parker Reynolds through multiple expansions before orchestrating its acquisition by a European healthcare conglomerate last year. Under her leadership, the company had doubled in size while maintaining the quality standards Richard had always prioritized. At 52, she had become a formidable presence in the healthcare industry, frequently cited as among the most influential women in medical technology leadership. Brandon and Maya were there too, having flown in from Seattle where their sustainable housing initiative had become a global model for eco-friendly, affordable living. Their company, Parker Sustainable Development, had started with a single experimental neighborhood and now consulted for governments worldwide on environmentally conscious community planning. Brandon's hair had silvered at the temples, giving him a distinguished look that suited the respected businessman and environmental advocate he had become. Maya, still striking at 48, had recently been appointed to a presidential commission on sustainable urban development. 15 years ago, I thought I knew exactly what my future held, I continued. I had planned everything meticulously: the company I would help build, the family I would create, the path I would follow. When that plan shattered overnight, it felt like the end of everything. I smiled, making eye contact with various guests. Instead, it was just the beginning of Mitchell Medical Technologies, which has now helped over 3 million children worldwide. The beginning of the Margaret Parker Foundation, which has provided respite and support to 10,000 families facing pediatric medical crises. The beginning of collaborations and innovations that none of us could have anticipated. My gaze returned to Richard, who nodded encouragingly, then to Brandon, whose expression held a complex mixture of respect and lingering regret. Across the room sat Diane Harper, nearly 90 now but still sharp as ever, who had been one of my earliest supporters during the tumultuous Parker-Reynolds merger. She raised her glass slightly, a private acknowledgement of our shared history. They say that when one door closes, another opens. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes you need to knock down a wall instead of waiting for doors to appear. This drew appreciative laughter. And that's what we've been doing for 15 years, breaking down barriers between medical technology and accessibility, between corporate interests and human needs, between what is and what could be. The screens around the room displayed images of children using our devices, a young girl swimming while wearing our waterproof cardiac monitor, a boy playing baseball with our neural responsive prosthetic arm, twin toddlers exploring a playground, while breathing through our nearly invisible respiratory support system. Each face represented the true measure of our success, far beyond balance sheets or market share statistics. As I concluded my remarks and returned to my seat, Marcus squeezed my hand beneath the table. He knew better than anyone how much this milestone meant, not just professionally, but personally. The path from vengeful ex-fiancé to industry leader had been neither straight nor simple. There had been funding challenges in the early years, regulatory hurdles that seemed insurmountable, moments of doubt when the weight of responsibility for employees' livelihoods and patients' well-being had felt crushing. Through it all, Marcus had been my anchor, never minimizing the obstacles but never doubting our ability to overcome them. The evening progressed with videos highlighting our company's major innovations, testimonials from families whose children had benefited from our technologies, and presentations on our newest research initiatives. Dr. Elena Vasquez, our brilliant research director who had joined us from Johns Hopkins 6 years ago, unveiled our next-generation neural interface that allowed children with severe mobility impairments to control adaptive equipment through subtle facial movements. The demonstration, featuring 12-year-old Zach, who had been paralyzed in a car accident, brought many guests to tears as he navigated his specialized wheelchair through an obstacle course using only slight changes in his expression. Throughout it all, I found myself reflecting on the strange, winding journey that had brought us all here. If Brandon hadn't betrayed me, if I hadn't discovered those messages, if I hadn't channeled my hurt into strategic action, none of this would exist. Thousands of children would be living more restricted lives. The Margaret Parker Foundation would never have been established. My own potential might have remained forever constrained by someone else's vision of who I should be. Margaret Parker had passed away 3 years earlier, her battle with Alzheimer's finally ending peacefully at the lakeside home she shared with Richard. In her final years, the experimental medications developed through Parker-Reynolds research had given her longer periods of lucidity than doctors had thought possible. Her legacy lived on through the foundation that bore her name, now housed in the former Parker estate and internationally recognized for its work with families of critically ill children. What had once been the site of Parker family galas and business dinners had been transformed into a healing retreat where exhausted parents could find respite and children could experience joy despite their medical challenges. After dinner, as guests mingled and the formal program gave way to celebration, I found a quiet moment on the venue's terrace overlooking Boston Harbor. The crisp October air carried the scent of salt water and distant wood smoke. The city lights reflected on the dark water, creating a mirror image of the skyline while boats navigated the harbor, their running lights tracing patterns across the darkness. A server appeared with a tray of champagne, but I declined, preferring clarity for the significant announcement I would make later. Instead, I watched the guests through the glass doors. Marcus charming a group of international investors, our twin daughters now chatting animatedly with Brandon's teenage girls who had joined the celebration after dinner. Lauren deep in conversation with the Secretary of Health and Human Services who had flown in specifically for the event. "Penny for your thoughts," came Richard's voice as he joined me, maneuvering his wheelchair through the open doors. The sound system inside shifted to a jazz quartet playing softly, providing a sophisticated soundtrack to the evening. I smiled, down at him, noting how the years had gentled his once commanding presence without diminishing its impact. Just taking it all in. 15 years is a long time. I was remembering that first office, the leaky ceiling, the secondhand furniture, the whiteboard where we mapped out our first 5-year plan. And yet, it passes in the blink of an eye. Richard's face, deeply lined now but still animated with intelligence, turned toward the harbor view. "I remember when you were just starting out, working in that tiny office above the coffee shop. Now look at you. A global corporation, partnerships on 3 continents, technologies that have changed pediatric care forever. None of which would have happened if your son hadn't been unfaithful," I observed wryly. Richard chuckled. "Perhaps the universe works in mysterious ways." He reached for my hand. "I've never properly thanked you, you know." "For what?" "For not letting your justified anger at Brandon destroy everything else. For continuing to see the value in Parker Industries even as you executed your revenge. For eventually finding a way to include all of us, even Brandon, in building something meaningful from the ashes." He squeezed my fingers. "It would have been easier to burn it all down and walk away. Many would have." I considered his words. "I don't think I can take credit for that much foresight. I was angry, hurt, determined to take control of my destiny. The rest evolved over time. As do all the best things in life." Richard's gaze drifted back to the harbor. "My memoir editor keeps pressing me to define the central theme of my life story. I told her yesterday that it's redemption, not just personal redemption, but the redemption of mistakes through their unexpected consequences." His memoir, The Parker Legacy, Innovation, Betrayal, and Redemption, had been published the previous year to critical acclaim and surprising commercial success. The book had spent 26 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list and was now being developed as a limited series by a major streaming platform. With unflinching honesty, it documented the rise of Parker Industries, the personal and professional dynamics that led to its merger with Reynolds Medical, and the subsequent creation of the Margaret Parker Foundation. The chapter describing my confrontation with Brandon and Kayla at Lucia's restaurant had generated particular interest, even being excerpted in Harvard Business Review as a case study in how personal relationships impact corporate decisions. Brandon, Lauren, Marcus, and I had all contributed our perspectives to the book, participating in extensive interviews and reviewing drafts to ensure accuracy. The result was a multifaceted account that had resonated far beyond the business community, drawing interest from readers fascinated by the human drama behind corporate maneuvering. The book's success had surprised us all, particularly Richard, who had initially written it primarily for his grandchildren and future Parker generations. "People are hungry for authentic stories of redemption," his editor had explained when the first printing sold out in 2 weeks. "Especially ones where the characters admit their flaws and grow through them." A portion of all proceeds went to the Margaret Parker Foundation, funding a new wing specifically for siblings of critically ill children, often the overlooked casualties of pediatric medical crises. "Speaking of unexpected consequences," Richard continued, "I saw you chatting with Kayla earlier. How is she finding the new research director position?" Dr. Kayla Porter, formerly Brandon's girlfriend, now a respected pediatric specialist with an impressive research background at Mayo Clinic, had recently joined the Margaret Parker Foundation as director of clinical research. Her journey had been remarkable in its own right. After the dramatic scene at Lucia's, she had refocused on her medical career with single-minded determination, eventually earning both an MD and PhD. Her groundbreaking work on pediatric pain management had changed treatment protocols nationwide. The irony of her new role had not been lost on any of us, but her expertise made her the perfect candidate. During her interview, she had addressed the elephant in the room directly. "I realize my history with the Parker family is complicated, but I believe my work speaks for itself, and perhaps there's a certain symmetry in all of us ultimately finding our right places." "She's brilliant," I replied honestly. "Her perspective as both a clinician and a researcher is exactly what the Foundation needed. The pilot program she's developing for remote pain assessment in nonverbal children could revolutionize treatment for our most vulnerable patients, and enough time has passed that the personal history is just that, history." I smiled slightly, remembering how awkward our first professional interaction had been 6 months ago. "Actually, we're having dinner next week to discuss a joint venture between her department and Mitchell Medical's neural interface team." "Time is a remarkable healer," Richard mused. "Though I suspect your capacity for moving forward has helped considerably." Before I could respond, Brandon joined us on the terrace, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He offered one to me. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, glancing between his father and me. "Not at all," Richard assured him. "Just reminiscing about the strange paths that led us all here." Brandon nodded, taking a sip of his champagne. At 50, he had finally grown into himself. The boyish charm replaced by a quieter confidence, the ambitious edge softened by years of meaningful work and family responsibilities. "Maya was just showing me pictures of your new Seattle office," he said to me. "Impressive space. When does Mitchell Medical West officially open?" 2 months, I replied. "We're still finalizing the research team, but the administrative staff moves in next week." After years of operating primarily from our Boston headquarters, Mitchell Medical Technologies was expanding to Seattle, a move that would have seemed unthinkable in the aftermath of my split with Brandon. Now, it was simply good business, allowing us to tap into the Pacific Rim markets and collaborate with West Coast research institutions. "Lauren mentioned you might need a sustainable design consultant for the research facilities," Brandon said casually. "If you're interested, Parker Sustainable has some availability this fall." I smiled at the offer. "I'll have my team reach out to you. Your work on the Foundation's adaptive technology wing was exactly the approach we're looking for." Richard watched our exchange with visible satisfaction. "And this," he said quietly, "is what I'm most proud of. Not the companies, not the technologies, not even the Foundation. But my family, all of my family, found their way back to collaboration and mutual respect." His inclusive definition of family, which had expanded over the years to include Marcus, Maya, and even Kayla in her new role, touched me deeply. For all the pain and complications of the past, Richard Parker had created a legacy of reconciliation that transcended business success. As if on cue, Marcus appeared in the terrace doorway. "There you all are. Lauren's looking for you, Richard. Something about the Foundation donor you wanted to meet." "Ah, yes." Richard straightened in his wheelchair. "The Williamson family. Their daughter has been using Avery's cardiac monitor for 3 years now. Potential major donors for the expansion project." He gestured for Brandon to help maneuver his chair. "Duty calls." As they left, Marcus took their place beside me at the railing. "Productive conversation?" "Just reflecting on the unlikely journey that brought us here." I leaned against him slightly. 15 years ago, would you ever have predicted we'd be celebrating my company's anniversary with Brandon Parker as a potential design consultant and his ex-girlfriend as our research partner?" Marcus laughed. "I wouldn't have predicted any of this, including that the woman who orchestrated a hostile takeover of her ex's family business would become my wife and the mother of our children. Our twin daughters, now 6, were at home with their favorite babysitter, a nursing student who received a scholarship from the Margaret Parker Foundation. Another full-circle connection in a life that seemed increasingly defined by them. Life is full of surprises, I agreed. Speaking of which, are you ready for our announcement? Marcus nodded, his expression turning more serious. If you're sure about the timing. I am. 15 years feels right, symmetrical somehow. We returned to the banquet hall, where the celebration continued in full swing. Lauren was now at the microphone, sharing amusing anecdotes from our years of collaboration. As she wrapped up, she gestured for me to rejoin her on the small stage. Before we continue the festivities, Lauren announced, Avery has one more piece of news to share. I took the microphone, suddenly aware of the significance of what I was about to say. The weight of 15 years, the struggles, achievements, growth, and evolution seemed to crystallize in this moment of transition. The faces around me represented not just colleagues and industry partners, but witnesses to a journey of transformation. Few could have predicted that night at Lucia's. Thank you all for celebrating this milestone with us tonight. Mitchell Medical Technologies has been my focus, my passion, and my greatest professional achievement for 15 years. I paused, making eye contact with key figures around the room. Dr. Vasquez, whose research genius had elevated our innovations. Diane Harper, who had believed in me when few others did. The parents of children whose lives our devices had changed. The early investors who had taken a chance on an angry woman with brilliant ideas and something to prove. Which makes this next announcement particularly meaningful. The room grew quieter as people sensed the weight of my words. Marcus gave an encouraging nod from his position near the stage. Our daughters, Sophia and Eleanor, watched with curious expressions, too young to fully understand the significance, but sensing the importance of the moment. Effective next quarter, I will be stepping back from day-to-day operations at Mitchell Medical to assume a new role as chair of the Margaret Parker Foundation. After 15 years of building technologies to improve children's lives, I'm ready to focus on ensuring those technologies reach every child who needs them, regardless of geography or economic circumstances. A murmur ran through the crowd, glasses pausing mid-toast as people processed the news. While I had served on the Foundation's board since its inception, taking on leadership had never been publicly discussed. Industry analysts in attendance were already reaching for their phones, recognizing the business implications of this transition. Richard Parker has been an extraordinary founding chair, I continued, gesturing toward him with deep respect. His vision transformed a family tragedy into a beacon of hope for thousands of families facing pediatric medical crises. But, as he recently reminded me during one of our lakeside conversations, even the most dedicated leaders eventually need to pass the torch. I'm honored that the board has unanimously approved this transition. Richard beamed from his place in the front row, clearly pleased that the news was now public. Margaret would have approved, I knew. She had once told me during a rare lucid moment in her final year that I understood the heart of their family legacy better than anyone outside the bloodline. This doesn't mean I'm abandoning Mitchell Medical, I clarified, aware of the stockholders and business reporters in attendance. I'll remain as chair of the board and chief innovation strategist, with particular focus on our global accessibility initiatives. But the company is in excellent hands with our current executive team, led by Dr. Vasquez, who will be stepping into the CEO role. Elena stood briefly, acknowledging the announcement with a modest nod. Her promotion had been carefully planned over the past year, a brilliant researcher with unexpected business acumen. She represented the perfect blend of scientific innovation and strategic thinking that had defined Mitchell Medical from the beginning. The time feels right to focus more of my energy on expanding the Foundation's reach, I continued. Our new international access program aims to bring Mitchell Medical Technologies to children in developing regions through an innovative partnership model that I'll be personally overseeing. As I elaborated on my vision for the Foundation's future, new programs, expanded research initiatives, international partnerships, I watched the faces of those who had been part of my journey from the beginning. Marcus, supportive as always, who had encouraged this transition despite knowing it would mean more travel and complexity in our already busy lives. Lauren, who had championed this move behind the scenes, recognized how the foundation could bridge the business interests of Parker Reynolds with the innovation focus of Mitchell Medical. Brandon, whose expression held genuine approval and perhaps a touch of admiration, having found his own path to purpose through environmental sustainability. I outlined our 5-year expansion plan, including satellite retreat centers in Europe and Asia, a virtual support network for families in remote locations, and a groundbreaking research initiative focused specifically on rare pediatric conditions often overlooked by mainstream medical research. The foundation would be expanding its scholarship program for siblings of critically ill children, addressing the often hidden impact of pediatric medical crises on entire family systems. Through these efforts, I concluded, the Margaret Parker Foundation will honor its namesake's compassion while embracing innovation that would have delighted her forward-thinking spirit. Margaret always believed that challenges could become opportunities with the right perspective. The foundation bearing her name embodies that philosophy daily. Richard's eyes shone with what might have been tears as he witnessed the final alignment of the legacy he had spent his life building. In his granddaughters, both mine and Brandon's, he could see the Parker spirit continuing into another generation. In the foundation, he could see his beloved wife's compassion institutionalized in the most meaningful way. And in me, stepping into this leadership role that circled back to where everything began, he could see the completion of a story more redemptive than anyone could have imagined when betrayal fractured our family bonds 15 years ago. Later that night, as Marcus and I returned home to relieve the babysitter, I paused in our bedroom to look at the framed photo on my dresser. Not the company milestone I might have been expected to display, but a simple shot of Crystal Lake at sunset, taken the evening Marcus had shown me the house that would become our home. "No regrets about the announcement?" Marcus asked, loosening his tie as he joined me. "None," I assured him. "It feels right, like closing one chapter and opening another." "Full circle," he observed, "from selling your shares in Parker Industries to leading the Parker Foundation." "Not quite a circle," I corrected. "More like a spiral, covering similar ground but from a higher perspective." He smiled, recognizing his own words from years ago reflected back to him. "The view from up here is pretty good, isn't it?" I thought about all we had built: our marriage, our family, our professional accomplishments, the network of relationships that had evolved from the ashes of betrayal and revenge. None of it looked like what I had planned 15 years ago, yet all of it felt more authentically mine than that original vision ever had. "Better than good," I replied. "It's exactly where I'm meant to be." As I drifted off to sleep that night, I found myself thinking about the young woman who had walked into Lucia's restaurant that fateful evening, armed with revenge and righteous anger. The crimson dress she had chosen so carefully, the shock on Brandon's face when he saw her waiting at their anniversary table, the devastating precision with which she had delivered news of the corporate takeover that would change everything. Wished I could tell her what lay ahead. The sleepless nights worrying about making payroll for her fledgling company, the exhilaration of the first successful clinical trial, the moment she would meet Marcus and recognize a partnership unlike anything she had known before. I wished I could show her the faces of children whose lives would be transformed by technologies she hadn't yet imagined, the letters from grateful parents that would line her office walls, the global impact of decisions made in that painful moment of betrayal. I wished I could tell her that the justice she sought would come, but not in the way she imagined. That the company she was about to claim would lead to one she would build herself. That the man who betrayed her would eventually become a respected colleague, their shared history transformed into a foundation for meaningful collaboration. That the family she thought she was losing would expand in unexpected ways, encompassing not just the Parkers, but a worldwide network of people united by common purpose. Most of all, I wished I could tell her that one day, the betrayal that felt like. An ending would be recognized as the beginning of something far better than she had ever dared to dream. That 15 years later, she would stand in a room full of people whose lives had been touched by the unexpected path that opened before her that night. That the tears she would shed in the days following that confrontation would be balanced 1,000 times over by moments of profound joy and satisfaction that would never have existed otherwise. I would tell her about the twin daughters whose existence would have been impossible with Brandon, about the lakeside home that would become the center of a life built on authentic connection rather than obligation, about the quiet moments of revelation when she would recognize that the universe had conspired through painful means to deliver her exactly where she needed to be. But perhaps it was better that she didn't know. After all, it was the uncertainty, the pain, the determination, the leap into the unknown that had forged the path to everything that mattered. It was the struggle that had revealed her strength, the betrayal that had freed her potential, the anger that had fueled innovation that would ultimately help thousands. And that, I realized as I drifted toward sleep, was the true legacy of that night at Lucia's. Not the revenge that had been served in a moment of justified anger, but the future it had unexpectedly created through years of purposeful growth. Not the company that had been taken, but the empire of impact that had been built in its place. Not the relationship that had ended, but the web of meaningful connections that had formed in its absence. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives become the catalysts for our greatest transformations. Sometimes betrayal becomes the doorway to authenticity. Sometimes revenge, pursued for all the right reasons, delivers justice in forms we never anticipated. And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, the story that begins with, "He took his girlfriend," to our anniversary dinner, ends not with bitterness, but with gratitude for the painful gift that changed everything. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.